She was just staring at me. She had something to say, and I could tell she was curious about the free listening sign. But she didn't seem to have the courage to speak to me, not yet. It was 2016, a hot July day in Cleveland, and Benjamin Mathis was planted outside the Republican National Convention. He held a simple homemade sign, free listening. And some people had taken advantage of that offer. They'd come up to Mathis to talk about their families, their jobs, and the reasons they were in Cleveland. But no one had yet engaged him solely on issues. But then the woman who'd been hesitating on the sidelines walked up like a young warrior preparing for battle. And she spoke. "I don't usually do this, and I know this isn't a hot button topic anymore, but I think abortion is wrong." And she elaborated, voicing an opinion that even most abortion opponents would find extreme. Benjamin Mathis recalls, as she spoke to me about her beliefs on abortion, I wanted to stop her and tell her my story. I've sat with two loved ones as they suffered through the difficult decision of ending a pregnancy. So as the woman spoke, the familiar burn of disagreement started to fire in me. There were so many things I wanted to say. I wanted to change her mind, to argue, to disagree. But of course, that's not what you do if you're sitting in a public place holding a free listening sign. Instead, Mathis took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for sharing that. Could you tell me your story? I'd love to know how you came to this point of view." The woman seemed puzzled by this request and continued her tirade for a few more minutes. And then, says Mathis, she paused and inhaled the whole world. "It's not fair," she cried. "All I've ever wanted to be is a mom. My whole life, I knew I was meant to have children. Then when I was 18, the doctor told me I'd never have children. My ovaries were damaged or missing. It doesn't matter which. I kept it a secret. And when my husband found out, he left me. I'm alone. My body doesn't work. I'm old. Who will ever love me?" So I guess I get upset when I see people who can get pregnant, who can have kids, whose bodies work, who can be moms, and they choose not to. Benjamin Mathis comments, "I wondered if she could hear my heart breaking. Sometimes there's nothing to disagree with. I didn't need to be right. I just needed to be there." She wiped away a few tears, gave me a hug, and thanked me for listening. She exhaled and walked back into the convention. Now, as far as we know, no one was converted through this conversation. No issues, quote unquote, were resolved. There was no political agreement, no meeting of the minds, but a compassionate connection was made, a meeting of the hearts, if you will, transcending slogans and sound bites. And when I read Benjamin Mathis' description of this exchange, it was somehow like finding water in a dry and thirsty land. I doubt I'm the only one who's alarmed by the deterioration of public conversation in this country. And it seems to have reached bottom during COVID and the last presidential campaign, But every time I think it can't possibly get any worse, it gets worse. And of course, when I remember back, I realize it's been declining for years. It was 2010, after all, 11 years ago, that Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert felt compelled to stage a Million Moderates march in Washington. The slogan, as I recall, was, "Turn it down a notch, will ya?" But in 11 years, the volume has only increased. And when I hear some of the rhetoric and see the footage from places like Charlottesville or the Capitol building on January 6th, or numerous rallies across the country, including in Michigan, it hits close to home. And not only do I fear for the future of our country, but also for the personal safety of some of my family, my African-American daughter-in-law and step-grandson, for instance, my transgender relative harassed on their college campus. And I know that some of you share this fear for yourselves or someone you love. You feel personally vulnerable. You have family members, loved ones, friends who are. Has it all gone too far, I wonder? Have we lost the chance to bind up our nation's wounds? Can we live together in peace? Can we find ways to coexist with people with whom we disagree? People whose opinions we find threatening? Over the years, I've found the work of Parker Palmer to be helpful in thinking through questions like these. He's a Quaker, a teacher, and the founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal in Madison, Wisconsin. In his book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, which he wrote about 10 years ago, he lifts up the idea of the politics of the brokenhearted. Palmer starts with a very personal story from 2004, the year he turned 65. That year, he began a descent into deep depression. And it wasn't his first encounter with depression, but at 65, it hit him especially hard as people close to him were dying and his own body was losing strength. And on top of the depression was a sense of becoming disoriented. He writes, "It was as if I had lost the secret decoder ring I owned when I was a kid, and with it, my ability to make sense of 21st century life." Simultaneously, he recalls, "I was dismayed at the state of the nation. I began to feel like a displaced person in my own land." But to quote Theodore Retke, Michigan poet, "In a dark time, the eye begins to see." In the midst of his depression, Palmer discovered new clarity about himself and his community. He also felt himself called to engage politics in a new way. And through this, he came to believe that heartbreak and depression don't have to leave us solitary or sequestered at home. They can instead expand our sense of connection with others, including those others whose basic beliefs are really contrary to our own. And he points out that they might not extend to every single person. He writes, "With people who are irrevocably committed to violence, I may never find the smallest patch of common ground. But could I find one with others whose views differ sharply from mine? Could I find a small patch, perhaps, but one large enough that we could stand there and talk for a while?" And he concludes that the answer is yes. For example, he thinks people at opposite ends of the political spectrum may nevertheless share some deep concerns, an abiding grief over some of modernity's worst features, perhaps: mindless relativism, corrosive cynicism, disdain for tradition and human dignity, indifference to suffering and death. But If the conversation stays abstract, connections will probably be elusive. Personal storytelling is the key to deeper understanding. Parker Palmer cites the example of dialogue programs for people with different views on contentious issues, like abortion, for instance. In these dialogue programs, the participants aren't allowed to state their positions on the issue until the very end of the day. Instead, they share their own stories while others in the group simply listen. And by doing this, they learn that hearing one another's stories creates an unexpected bond. They learn that the more you know another person's story, the less possible it is to see that person as your enemy. But let me be clear about something. This is not a plea to abandon deeply held convictions. We have every right to, we must honor our beliefs, to cherish and to act on them. We should be out there making our point of view known, working to change public policy. But a key principle that I learned from some community organizer training I took for ministers is that you don't create systemic change without first building relationships. And so, can we honor those with a different point of view? Can we disagree with people without demonizing them? Not always easy, I realize. But I think we can. For some of us, myself included, it's going to take effort and discipline, and also relearning some habits of the heart. For me, speaking personally, one of those habits is a tendency to retreat into logic in the face of disagreement. Going along with that is a pretty deep need to be right. And so when disagreement emerges, one of the things I need to do, instead of jumping into the fray, is to take a deep breath and connect with something deeper. As the song goes, peace begins with me. Now, by this, I'm not saying that the blame for deteriorating public discourse falls equally on everyone. I do think that some people have contributed more than others to the breakdown of civility. At the same time, I know that trying to change anyone but myself is futile, and that is always humbling to realize. But the good news about this is, if we change our own patterns, there's a chance we will give others the space to change theirs. And that means we might be able to free ourselves within some seemingly not locked in conflicts. From family systems theory, we get some encouraging news that any one person in an angry or anxious system has the power to lower the volume, to turn things down a notch, which means that even if some are guiltier than others, all of us are responsible because any of us can change the conversation. One last thought. This congregation, Cub, is a good laboratory for practicing the politics of the brokenhearted. Each one of us comes not only with a point of view, but with a story and some piece of our heart broken. And many of us, through some variety of small group ministry, already have a deep practice in the art of listening. And this can inform our conversations in the rest of our congregation's life. I went to the interim ministers seminar a few years ago, and there transitions director Keith Cron gave each one of us a button. It reads, "Less judgment, more curiosity." I like that button. I liked it so well, I gave it to somebody else. And it reminds me to ask when encountering disagreement, tell me some of your story. I'd love to know how you came to that point of view. Let me close with these words attributed to our Universalist ancestor, Hosea Ballou. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Blessed be.